When my boss looked me dead in the eye and told me I was not qualified for the promotion I had essentially created, I did not argue. I smiled, got in my car, and drove home in silence. 3 days later, I turned my phone back on to 90 missed calls and a company in absolute freefall. My name is Clara, I am 33 years old, and for years, I played the role of the beautiful daughter and the relentless corporate workhorse. If you have ever sacrificed your own success just to keep the peace in a toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you will definitely want to hear how the people who tried to bury me ended up digging their own graves, which is exactly why we feel this transition is the best move for the company. Vice President Donovan finished his sentence, his voice echoing in the glass-enclosed boardroom of Apex Tech Solutions. The 55-year-old executive carelessly tossed my flawless annual performance review aside, letting the thick stack of papers slide across the polished mahogany table. I sat completely still, my hands folded in my lap, processing the words that had just left his mouth. "You are incredibly hardworking." Clara Donovan continued adjusting his expensive tie. "But for the senior director position, we need someone with real leadership vision, someone who naturally commands a room. Therefore, the promotion is going to Jamal." I slowly turned my head to look at the man sitting across from me. Jamal, my 32-year-old brother-in-law, leaned back in his leather ergonomic chair. As an African-American man, with $1 million smile and a silver tongue, Jamal had always possessed an unearned arrogance that charmed exactly the wrong kind of people. He was a master at taking credit for other people's hard work, specifically my hard work. Over the past 2 years, I had covered his mistakes, fixed his broken reports, and quietly handled his client complaints just to keep the peace at family dinners. Right now, that arrogance was on full display. He smirked at me, his eyes dancing with triumph. Click, click. The sound broke the heavy silence in the room. He was repeatedly clicking a black and silver pen. Not just any pen. It was a $500 Mont Blanc pen. The exact same pen I had purchased for him as a congratulatory gift 2 years ago, when I personally pulled strings to get him hired at that very company. He had been unemployed for 6 months, and I had risked my own professional reputation to vouch for him. Now he was sitting across from me, stealing the promotion I had worked 70 weeks to secure. "Do not take it too hard, Clara," Jamal said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to look like the authoritative leader he clearly believed he was. "You are still an essential part of the operation structure. I am really going to need you to stay on my team to handle all those boring spreadsheets. You are so good at the tedious stuff." I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or throw a tantrum. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. The puzzle pieces were rapidly snapping together in my mind. This was not just a corporate betrayal. This was a family conspiracy. The echo of a phone call from the previous night suddenly rang loud and clear in my memory. My mother, Martha, had called me right as I was reviewing my final presentation for this role. Her tone had been urgent, demanding, and utterly devoid of any consideration for my feelings. "Clara," my mother had said through the phone, "you need to step aside on this promotion. Jamal needs this more than you do. Olivia is 29 and pregnant with her first child. They want to buy that new 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, and Jamal needs a higher salary to qualify for the mortgage. You are single. You do not have a family to support. It is your duty to help your sister. Family takes care of family." She had commanded me to sabotage my own career, so her golden child daughter could have a perfect suburban life, funded by a husband who could not even write a basic data query. I had refused her demand last night, but clearly my mother had found another way. She must have pressured Jamal to go behind my back to smooth Donovan on the golf course to steal the role I had basically invented. They expected me to argue. They expected me to beg, or maybe offer to train Jamal while he took the credit and the massive salary bump. Donovan looked at me expecting compliance. Jamal kept clicking that expensive pen, waiting for me to nod and accept my place in the shadows. Instead, I stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. I reached up and unclipped my employee badge from my blazer. The plastic ID card felt light in my hand, I tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed right on top of my discarded performance review with a sharp smack. I looked directly into Jamal's eyes, watching his smug smile falter just a fraction. Then I looked at Donovan, whose face suddenly registered a flicker of confusion. They believed employees would always accept mistreatment for a paycheck. 3. My family had conditioned them to believe I would always surrender my own happiness to ensure theirs. They were both completely and entirely wrong. "Good luck with the spreadsheets," I said, my voice completely steady and chillingly calm. I did not wait to hear their empty excuses or backpedaling. I turned around, pushed the heavy glass door open, and walked away from that miserable room forever. I am out. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, sealing their stunned silence inside the boardroom. My heels struck the polished concrete floor, setting a sharp and rapid rhythm. I did not run. I walked with the absolute precision of someone walking away from a fire. "Wait." Jamal's voice hissed behind me. His leather shoes slapped loudly against the floor. I ignored him. I reached my desk at the center of the bullpen. The entire floor was a sea of gray cubicles and buzzing monitors. I grabbed a small cardboard box, a few framed photos, a favorite coffee mug, my ergonomic mouse. I started dropping them into the box. "Clara, stop this right now," Jamal whispered. His eyes darted around the room nervously. "You are making a huge scene. You are embarrassing the family. Are you listening to me?" Jamal grabbed the edge of my desk. "Mom is going to flip out if you do this. Olivia needs that house. You cannot just throw a tantrum and quit because you did not get your way. Stop packing and get back in that boardroom before Donovan decides to actually accept your resignation." I did not offer him a single syllable in response. He was losing control of the narrative. "What is going on out here?" Donovan boomed. The entire office froze. Donovan stormed out of the glass boardroom. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He marched down the center aisle. "You listen to me very carefully," Clara Donovan shouted, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You do not just walk out of my office. You do not throw your badge on my table. If you walk out that door today, I will personally make sure you never work in corporate logistics again. I know every major player in this industry. I will make one phone call and your career is permanently over. You will be blacklisted from here to the coast." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room. My coworkers stared at me with wide eyes, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of a powerful executive destroying my professional future. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. Instead, I reached for the one item on my desk that truly mattered, my personal laptop. I opened the sleek silver device and flipped the screen up. "What are you doing?" Jamal demanded, his voice trembling slightly. He tried to look at my screen, but I angled it away from him. I was executing a sequence I had prepared for months just in case this exact scenario ever played out. Apex Tech Solutions handled billions of dollars in freight and shipping logistics. But their legacy software was a broken, tangled mess. For the past 3 years, the entire company had been running smoothly because of a proprietary back-end routing system. It was an advanced algorithm that automated the most complex supply chain issues, cutting delivery times in half and saving the company millions in operational costs. Donovan thought the corporate technology department built it. Jamal told everyone he managed it. The truth was entirely different. I built it. I coded it from scratch late at night on my own personal equipment on my own time. I owned the source code. I owned the intellectual property outright through a private business entity. I had merely granted Apex Tech a free revocable license to use it because it made my job easier and kept clients happy. My fingers danced across the keyboard. 10 keystrokes. That was all it took. I navigated to the administrative dashboard of the routing system. I clicked the master control panel. I initiated the revocation protocol. I deactivated the access keys connecting my private server to the Apex Tech corporate network. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. A small green checkmark appeared on my screen confirming the total disconnection. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap and placed it carefully into my cardboard box. I placed my charger on top of the closed laptop. I arranged my items so nothing would spill or break during my drive home. I took one final look at the desk, where I had sacrificed my time, energy, and mental health for ungrateful management, and a brother-in-law who stole my achievements. The surface was now bare, reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. "You are making the biggest mistake of your entire life," Donovan sneered, crossing his arms over his chest, completely unaware of the digital bomb I had just detonated. His face was twisted in anger, furious that his public display of power was not getting the submissive reaction he demanded. He thought I was throwing away a steady paycheck. He had no idea I was walking away with the keys to his entire operational kingdom. I picked up the box. It weighed almost nothing. I turned to face Jamal, who was standing frozen in my workspace. His arrogant posture had vanished, replaced by a rigid stiffness. I looked him dead in the eye and gave him a slow, chilling smile. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, a predatory look that finally made him step back. He suddenly realized he had no idea how to actually do the job he just stole. Without my system, his promotion was totally worthless. I walked past Donovan without a single word. My heels clicked against the concrete floor, echoing loudly in the completely silent room. I kept my head high, my posture perfect. I walked straight to the elevator bank and pressed the down button. The button illuminated with a soft white glow. I watched the digital floor display numbers descend from the penthouse level. The entire office watched me. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the phone seemed to have stopped ringing. The soft chime of the elevator arriving sounded incredibly loud in the heavy quiet. The polished metal doors slid open. I stepped directly into the elevator. I turned to face the bullpen as the heavy metal doors glided shut, cutting off my view of Donovan's red face and Jamal's panicked stare. The descent took exactly 40 seconds. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel panic. Instead, icy relief washed over me. For years, I had carried the immense weight of my family's unreasonable expectations, breaking my back to keep the peace while they eagerly handed my hard-earned achievements to my brother-in-law. That crushing weight was finally gone. I walked out of the Apex Tech building, stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, and inhaled a breath of fresh air. I climbed into my car, tossed the cardboard box onto the passenger seat, and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was lighting up with incoming calls from human resources and text messages from my mother. Martha was undoubtedly demanding an explanation for why Jamal was frantically texting her about my sudden departure. I did not read a single message. I held the power button down, watched the screen go black, and tossed the device into the glove compartment. I drove home in silence, enjoying the smooth highway traffic. My apartment welcomed me with a quiet serenity I had deeply missed. I kicked off my heels, dropped my blazer on the armchair, and walked into the kitchen. I uncorked a bottle of red wine I had been saving. Today was a special occasion. I poured a glass, grabbed my laptop from my box, and sat down at my kitchen island. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room as I opened my encrypted file system. It was time to review the legal armor I had spent years building. I opened a folder labeled Nexus Freight Dynamics. This was my private registered corporate entity. I established it 3 years ago when I realized the sheer magnitude of the supply chain inefficiencies at Apex Tech. Back then, I approached Donovan with a proposal to build an automated routing system. He laughed in my face, telling me creating proprietary software was above my pay grade and unnecessary. So, I built it anyway. I spent my weekends coding a highly advanced logistical framework that could predict shipping delays, route freight trucks in real time, and calculate optimal fuel expenditures. When I finished, I quietly integrated it into my daily workflow to manage my workload. Within 2 months, my department's productivity skyrocketed. Soon, the entire company was relying on the flawless data outputs my system generated. Jamal took credit for the seamless operational flow, claiming his leadership drove the profits. But they never owned the machine. They only enjoyed the results. I had drafted a meticulous software licensing agreement under Nexus Freight Dynamics Meets. The contract granted Apex Tech a free, revocable license to utilize the routing code. Because they never paid me for the software, I developed it exclusively on my personal hardware outside of company hours. My intellectual property rights were completely airtight. The fine print of the license stated that the creator retained the absolute right to terminate access at any moment without prior warning for any reason whatsoever. By pressing those 10 keystrokes in the bullpen, I had simply exercised my legal right as the sole proprietor of the software. I took a slow sip of my wine. Apex Tech handled hundreds of thousands of active shipping routes every single day. Without my algorithm, constantly calculating and correcting the logistics grid, their corporate network was effectively a blind giant running toward a cliff. I closed the laptop, finished my wine, and decided I was going to enjoy a long weekend. For the next 72 hours, I lived in absolute peace. I did not look at a computer screen. I did not check my email. I went for long runs in the nearby park. I read a fictional book from cover to cover. I slept for 8 hours a night, waking up without the crushing anxiety of managing Jamal's incoming disasters or dealing with my mother's manipulative guilt trips. The world outside my apartment continued to spin, but my personal universe was calm. Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine pouring through my bedroom blinds. I stretched, made a cup of coffee, and decided the blackout period was officially over. It was time to see the damage. I retrieved my phone from the glove compartment of my car and plugged it into the charger in my kitchen. I pressed the power button and waited for the device to boot up. The moment the screen illuminated, the phone seized up. It began vibrating violently against the granite countertop, emitting a relentless barrage of notification chimes. The screen exploded with a chaotic flood of red alerts. I picked up the device and looked at the lock screen. 90 missed calls, 154 text messages. The notifications painted a picture of corporate devastation. There were 20 calls from Donovan alone. There were 30 calls from Jamal. The rest were from frantic executives, board members, and my hysterical parents. I scrolled through the text messages. Clara, the entire freight network is down. Call me immediately. This is Donovan. What did you do to the system? We are losing millions. Pick up the phone. Clara, please. The clients are pulling their contracts. You have to fix this. How could you do this to your family? Jamal is crying in his office. Apex Tech's nationwide network had collapsed. Trucks were stranded at distribution centers without routing orders. Major corporate clients were flying blind. The company was bleeding money by the minute, and the executives were in panic mode. My brother-in-law, the newly minted senior director of operations, had been exposed as a fraud who could not even turn the lights back on. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The snowball had officially started rolling down the mountain, and it was about to crush every person who had taken me for granted. Before I could even set my coffee mug down on the counter, a violent pounding echoed through my apartment. The knocking was not polite or hesitant. It was a frantic, aggressive hammering against the wood, loud enough to rattle the picture frames hanging in my hallway. I glanced at the digital clock on my microwave. It was barely 8:00 in the morning. Nobody visits unannounced at this hour unless they are selling something or desperate. Judging by the digital carnage on my phone screen, I knew exactly which category my visitors fell into. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I did not bother looking through the peephole. I reached out, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. My entire toxic family stood in the hallway, looking like a mob, preparing to storm a castle. My sister Olivia stood near the back, heavily pregnant and clutching her designer handbag with white knuckles. My mother Martha and my father Richard flanked the doorway, their faces drawn tight with anger and exhaustion. But the person leading the charge was Jamal. Before I could even offer a greeting, Jamal shoved past me. He did not ask for permission to enter my home. He simply barged into my sanctuary, bringing the frantic energy of a collapsing corporate empire right into my living room. My parents and Olivia filed in right behind him, forming a wall of hostility in my entryway. Jamal was completely unrecognizable from the smug, tailored executive who had smirked at me in the glass boardroom just 3 days ago. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. His tie hung loosely around his neck, the knot pulled down in sheer panic. His eyes were bloodshot from a severe lack of sleep, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He was not acting like a senior director of operations. He was acting like a man who was watching his entire life burn to the ground. "Fix it," Jamal screamed, his voice cracking as he paced across my living room rug. "You need to fix it right now, Clara. Turn the system back on. Give me the administrative passwords." I closed the front door calmly. Leaning back against the solid wood, I crossed my arms over my chest and watched him panic. "Fix what, Jamal?" I asked, keeping my voice completely level. "I no longer work at Apex Tech Solutions. Your operational problems are exactly that. Your problems. Do not play games with me," Jamal yelled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "The entire freight network is completely dead. We have thousands of trucks sitting idle at distribution centers across the country. Drivers cannot get their routing assignments. Warehouses cannot process their incoming inventory. The automated dispatch software is demanding an encryption key that nobody in the entire technology department possesses. You changed the master passwords and locked us out." I watched his chest heave as he struggled to catch his breath. The sheer terror in his eyes was almost beautiful to witness. He had spent years riding on my coattails, pretending my hard work was his own brilliant strategy. Now faced with an actual technological crisis, the newly minted senior director was completely helpless. "The Vanguard logistics accounts are failing," Jamal continued, his voice rising in pitch. "Vanguard is our biggest client. They move millions of dollars in freight every single day. Their regional managers have been calling my personal cell phone since Friday night, demanding to know why their entire supply chain is paralyzed. If we do not restore the routing system by noon today, Vanguard is going to pull their contract. If they pull their contract, Apex Tech goes bankrupt. Do you understand what you have done? Hand over the administrative passwords right now." He lunged forward, stopping just inches from where I stood. He tried to use his physical presence to intimidate me, a tactic he often used during family arguments to force compliance. But I did not shrink away. I did not lower my gaze. I stood my ground, staring directly into his bloodshot eyes. "I do not owe you anything, Jamal," I said softly. "You wanted the leadership role. You wanted the title and the salary and the corner office. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. Real leaders figure out how to solve catastrophic network failures. I suggest you head back to the office and start typing." Jamal let out a sound of pure frustration. "You are sabotaging my career out of jealousy." He spat the words at me, his face twisting with rage. "That is what this is all about. You are bitter because Donovan finally recognized my talent. You are throwing a massive destructive tantrum because you could not handle losing the promotion to a better candidate. You locked the system just to make me look bad in front of the executive board. You are trying to ruin my life because you are jealous." The accusation was so wildly disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. Jamal actually believed his own fabricated narrative. He truly believed he possessed talent completely, ignoring the fact that he was currently standing in my living room, begging me to save a company he claimed to lead. His arrogance was breathtaking, but his desperation was palpable. He needed me to cave. He expected me to bow my head, apologize for causing a scene, and hand over the keys to my proprietary software just to restore the family peace. My mother stepped forward, placing herself between Jamal and me. She positioned herself as the ultimate family peacemaker. Though her version of peacemaking always involved me sacrificing my dignity to appease my sister's husband. Martha looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. The exact same look she used when I was a teenager to make me feel small and insignificant. She reached out and touched my arm, her fingers gripping my sleeve tightly. "Clara, please stop being so difficult," Martha continued, her voice dropping into that familiar, sickeningly sweet tone she always used when she was trying to manipulate me into submission. "You know your brother-in-law did not mean any of those harsh things he just said. He is just under a tremendous amount of stress right now. You are family, Clara. You have to fix this system for him." I pulled my arm out of her grasp. I took a step back, breaking the physical connection she was trying to use to anchor her guilt trip. Richard stepped forward to fill the gap. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the stern patriarchal authority he thought he still held over me. Listen to your mother, Richard demanded, his voice thick with condescension. You are acting completely out of line. We did not raise you to be this vindictive. Jamal is simply trying to do his job and provide for your sister. You should be helping him succeed, not throwing obstacles in his path just because your ego took a tiny bruise at work. Give him the passwords. Apologize for this ridiculous stunt and we can all move past this immediately. A tiny bruise, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I built the entire logistical framework that is currently keeping his company afloat. I handed him every report, every strategy, every single presentation that earned him that promotion. And you call my reaction a tiny bruise to my ego. You call my refusal to be a doormat vindictive. Martha threw her hands in the air, her face twisting into a mask of pure unadulterated outrage. How can you be so selfish? She screamed completely, abandoning her sweet peacemaker persona. The veins in her neck strained as she pointed sharply at Jamal and Olivia. Jamal is the provider of this family. Olivia is pregnant. They are building a life, a real future. And you are trying to tear it all down because you are miserable and alone. It is just like when you refused to co-sign her car loan. You have always been obsessed with watching your sister fail. The air in the living room suddenly felt charged with electricity. The mention of that car loan was the exact weapon she had used against me for years, but this time it was a profound mistake on her part. I felt a cold, hard smile pull at the corners of my mouth. I stepped directly toward my mother, forcing her to look me in the eye. You mean the car loan you wanted me to pay using my community college tuition money? I asked, my voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. My mother flinched, but I did not stop. You wanted me to empty the bank account I built by working back-to-back night shifts at a diner. You demanded I hand over every cent of my education fund, so Olivia could buy a brand new luxury vehicle she could not afford. The tuition I paid for by working those night shifts while you and Dad bought Olivia a Mercedes in cash for her high school graduation, that car loan. Richard stepped in front of Martha, his face wreathing. Do not speak to your mother that way, he barked. We provided a roof over your head. We gave you everything you needed to succeed. You gave Olivia everything she wanted. I corrected him swiftly, maintaining my absolute composure. You gave me a roof and an endless list of demands. You expected me to finance her lifestyle while I wore secondhand clothes and studied on the floor of a basement apartment. You built a pedestal for her and expected me to gladly lie down and be the stairs she stepped on to reach it. That dynamic is completely over. I will not finance Jamal's unearned corporate success the same way I refuse to finance Olivia's cars. Right on cue. Olivia let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She stumbled backward, bumping into the wall, and immediately clutched her rounded stomach with both hands. Tears instantly flooded her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup. Oh my God, Olivia wailed, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. The stress is too much for the baby. Jamal, it hurts. My stomach hurts so badly. Clara is doing this on purpose. She wants me to lose the house. She wants me to lose everything. Jamal rushed to her side, wrapping his arms protectively around her shoulders. He glared at me with absolute disgust, completely ignoring the fact that his own spectacular incompetence was the root cause of this entire situation. Look at what you are doing to your pregnant sister, Jamal shouted, his voice echoing loudly off my apartment walls. You are a monster, Clara. A cold, bitter monster. Oh, Martha rushed to Olivia's other side, rubbing her back and making soothing noises. We need to get her out of here, Martha said frantically. The negative energy in this room is toxic. Clara, I hope you are happy with yourself. You are destroying this family. I stood my ground in the center of my living room, watching their theatrical performance unfold. It was the exact same script they had followed my entire life. Make an unreasonable demand, accuse me of selfishness when I refuse, and then have Olivia play the fragile victim to force my compliance through overwhelming guilt. For 33 years, it had worked flawlessly. Every single time she cried, every single time they called me selfish, I would eventually cave. I would write the check, do the homework, fix the spreadsheet, step aside and apologize for existing. But not today. Today, the script was being rewritten, and I was the one holding the pen. The guilt trip that used to paralyze me now felt completely powerless, entirely transparent, and deeply pathetic. I looked at Olivia, who was peering at me from behind her hands, waiting for me to break. I turned my back on her performance and walked directly into my kitchen. I picked up my coffee mug from the granite counter. The ceramic was still pleasantly warm against my palms. I brought the rim to my lips and took a long, slow sip. The rich, dark roast grounded me. The frantic yelling, the manufactured tears, and the aggressive posturing happening in my living room felt like a poorly written television show playing at a low volume. I was completely unfazed. The chaotic energy they brought into my home bounced off my absolute calm. I walked back out from the kitchen and stood leaning against the island, holding my mug with both hands. I watched my mother stroke Olivia's hair, while my father continued to glare at me with righteous indignation. Jamal was still holding my sister, murmuring comforting words while shooting me venomous looks over her shoulder. They were all waiting for my capitulation. They expected me to panic at the sight of Olivia in distress. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. My voice did not echo or shout. It cut through their noise with the precision of a scalpel. My father opened his mouth to launch into another tirade about family loyalty, but I held up a single authoritative finger. The gesture was so sharp and unexpected that it actually silenced him. "Since we are all gathered here today to discuss Jamal's thriving career, let us talk about his actual qualifications," I said, maintaining my relaxed posture against the kitchen island. "Let us talk about the newly appointed Senior Director of Operations." I looked directly at my parents, who were suddenly looking very confused. Over the past 2 years, Jamal has not produced a single original piece of data analysis. Every quarterly report he presented to the executive board was generated using my custom Excel templates. Every single one. If you ask him to build a pivot table right now, he will break out in a cold sweat. If you ask him to explain the supply chain bottlenecks in the Midwest corridor, he will recite the exact summary paragraph I typed for him on Tuesday. Jamal stepped away from Olivia, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. "Clara, shut your mouth," he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. He lunged forward slightly, but my father put a hand on his arm to stop him. Richard was looking at Jamal, then back at me, a flicker of doubt finally piercing his patriarchal arrogance. "He cannot manage logistics," I continued, my voice steady and unrelenting. "He does not know how to code. He does not understand the back-end rowing architecture. He spent his days scheduling catered lunches and playing golf with Donovan while I managed the entire freight network from my cubicle. The only reason the Vanguard logistics account stayed with Apex Tech is because I personally monitored their shipping routes every weekend. Jamal got the promotion because he is excellent at taking credit for my late nights. He is a phenomenal actor just like Olivia. But acting does not fix catastrophic network failures. Nay, acting does not reboot a paralyzed supply chain. You are lying." Martha gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so dramatic it belonged on a stage. "Jamal is a brilliant executive. Donovan said so himself at the holiday party. You are just saying these horrible things to ruin his reputation because you are a spiteful person." I set my coffee mug down on the counter with a heavy thud. "I am not lying, Martha. I am explaining exactly why the company is currently bleeding millions of dollars. The system that runs Apex Tech does not belong to Apex Tech. It belongs to me." The living room went dead silent. The sound of city traffic humming outside my apartment window suddenly seemed incredibly loud. Richard frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" Richard asked, his voice losing its aggressive edge. "You work for them. They own whatever you do at work. That is how employment works. Clara, stop making up ridiculous stories to justify your behavior." I shook my head slowly, pitying his ignorance. "I built the automated routing system on my own time. I wrote the source code on my personal laptop, sitting right here at this kitchen island on my weekends and evenings. Apex Tech never compensated me for development. I never signed an intellectual property transfer. 3 years ago, I legally registered a limited liability company. I filed the copyright and the patents under my private business entity. The software that Jamal claims to manage belongs entirely to my independent LLC. The word LLC dropped into the room like a heavy stone. My parents stared at me completely stunned. The concept that their quiet, obedient pushover daughter had established a legal corporate entity and secured intellectual property rights behind their backs was entirely incomprehensible to them. They had spent their entire lives underestimating my intelligence, viewing merely as a support system for Olivia and her husband. The realization that I was a business owner, a legal entity holding the keys to a corporate empire, short-circuited their entire worldview. Martha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Richard looked at Jamal, whose pale, terrified face confirmed every single word I had just spoken. Jamal knew I was telling the truth. He knew he had built his entire career on a foundation of sand, and I had just washed the sand away. I granted Apex Tech a free license to use my software, I explained, driving the final nail into the coffin. Because they never paid my LLC a single dime for the technology. That license was entirely revocable at my discretion. When Donovan insulted me and gave my job to a man who cannot even run a basic data query, I simply revoked the license. I logged out, I took my private property, and I went home. I did not sabotage anything. I simply took back what rightfully belonged to me. Jamal stared at me, searching for an argument that did not exist. The crushing reality had finally penetrated his thick skull. He could not charm his way out of a missing source code. His operations were dead. Humiliation flooded his face, rapidly morphing into vicious rage. He lunged a step closer, his fists balled. "You think you are so smart?" Jamal spat, his voice trembling with terror and malice. "You think you can shut down a logistics network and walk away?" Donovan has already contacted the police. He has the corporate legal team drafting the lawsuit right this second. They are tracking your digital footprint. You are going to prison for corporate sabotage. Clara, you are going to be locked in a federal cell, and I am going to testify against you. They are going to ruin you financially. Jamal continued, pointing his finger at my face. They will drain your bank accounts. You will be paying restitution to Apex Tech Solutions for the rest of your miserable life. Give me the access keys right now, and I might convince Donovan not to press criminal charges. His threats were hollow. Jamal did not understand intellectual property law. Donovan was just a corporate bully. I felt profound pity looking at Jamal. He was a cornered animal barking at a concrete wall. Before I could dissect his empty legal threats, my father intervened. Richard stepped around my mother, his face a mask of grim determination. He completely ignored the fact that his son-in-law had just threatened me with federal prison. Richard only cared about preserving the illusion of his perfect family. "Clara, listen to me," Richard demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. "I do not care about your little software company. I do not care who wrote the code or who deserves the credit. This has gone far enough. Go into your bedroom, bring out your laptop, and hand it over to Jamal. You will do it right now for the good of the family name. We will not have our reputation dragged through the mud because of your selfish behavior." He was entirely willing to force me to surrender a multi-million-dollar asset just to save face at the country club. He wanted me to hand over my private property to a man who had actively stolen my career progression. "I am not handing over my laptop," I stated, my tone dangerously calm. "You will do as you are told." Richard roared, taking a heavy step toward me. He reached his hand out, fully expecting me to flinch and obey the patriarchal command he had utilized to control me for 33 years. "Hand over the machine right now, or you will regret it." I did not flinch. I did not argue the legalities of corporate sabotage with men who refused to understand the law. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I kept my eyes locked on my father as I unlocked the screen. The family watched me, a sudden wave of uncertainty rippling through their aggressive formation. They expected tears. They expected an argument. They did not expect absolute icy detachment. I tapped the phone app. I deliberately pressed the number 9, then the number 1, then the number 1 again. I held the illuminated screen up so my father, my mother, Olivia, and Jamal could clearly see the 3 digits typed on the display. I hovered my thumb directly over the green call button. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my home before I report a break-in," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like breaking glass. I will tell the dispatcher that 4 hostile individuals have forced their way into my apartment, that they are threatening me, and that I fear for my physical safety. The police station is 3 blocks away. They will be here in less than 5 minutes. Martha gasped, grabbing Richard's arm. Clara, you would not dare call the police on your own parents. Try me, I replied, my thumb hovering less than an inch from the button. 20 seconds. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The arrogant entitlement completely vanished, replaced by sheer panic. My parents had spent their entire lives cultivating a spotless public image. The mere thought of being escorted out of a residential building in handcuffs by uniformed police officers was a nightmare they could not stomach. Let us go, Richard snapped, grabbing Martha by the elbow and shoving her toward the front door. She is completely unhinged. She has lost her mind. Olivia let out another dramatic wail, clinging to Jamal's arm as they scrambled toward the exit. You are a terrible sister, Olivia cried, her face twisted in genuine fury. Now that her victim routine had completely failed. I hope you rot in that apartment. I hope Donovan destroys you. Jamal glared at me with pure venom as he backed out of the doorway. This is not over, Clara, he threatened, his voice shaking. You are going to pay for this. You are going to lose everything. 10 seconds I counted aloud, never taking my eyes off them. They stumbled out into the hallway, a chaotic mess of cursing, crying, and panicked retreats. Richard slammed my front door shut behind them so hard the walls vibrated. I stood in my living room, listening to their frantic footsteps echoing down the corridor, followed by the distant ding of the elevator arriving. I lowered my phone and deleted the numbers from the screen. The apartment was finally silent again. The invasion was over. My family had shown me exactly who they were, and I had shown them exactly what I was capable of. I walked over to the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and fastened the security chain. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of victory. I was ready for war. I was absolutely ready for war. The very next morning, I stepped out of a cab in front of the Capitol Grill, an exclusively upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago. This was the kind of restaurant where multi-million-dollar acquisitions were negotiated over dry-aged rye-buys and perfectly chilled martinis. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors, bypassing the crowded bar area, and let the hostess guide me to a secluded leather booth, tucked away in the back corner. Waiting for me was attorney Harrison. Harrison was a 60-year-old legal shark who specialized entirely in intellectual property and corporate litigation. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit and projected an aura of absolute unshakable confidence. We had been quietly working together for 3 years. Ever since I first realized the massive value of the code I was writing for Apex Tech Solutions, I slid into the booth across from him and immediately pulled a thick, crumpled envelope from my designer tote bag. Good morning, Clara, Harrison said, taking a slow sip of his sparkling water. You look remarkably rested for a woman whose former employer is currently making national headlines for a catastrophic operational failure. I smiled and placed the envelope directly on the white linen tablecloth. I slept a solid 8 hours, I replied, sliding the paper toward him. But it seems Donovan and his legal team stayed up all night. A courier delivered this to my apartment building at 6 in the morning. Harrison picked up the envelope, pulled out the thick stack of legal documents, and adjusted his reading glasses. It was a formal cease and desist order from Apex Tech Solutions. The letter was packed with aggressive corporate jargon. It demanded the immediate surrender of all administrative passwords, threatened a massive civil lawsuit for breach of contract, and accused me of corporate espionage. I watched Harrison read through the aggressive demands. I expected him to frown, or perhaps take out a pen to highlight the legal threats. Instead, Harrison threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, booming laugh that caused a nearby waiter to glance over in our direction. Harrison tossed the document back onto the table, like it was a piece of trash. This is absolutely pathetic, Harrison said, chuckling as he took off his glasses. This entire document is nothing but corporate posturing and hot air. Donovan is terrified and his legal team is grasping at straws. They have absolutely zero legal ground to stand on, and they know it. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. Are you absolutely certain the intellectual property filings are watertight? I asked, needing the verbal confirmation to calm the residual adrenaline from yesterday's home invasion. At Clara, your paperwork is ironclad, Harrison assured me, his tone shifting to absolute professional certainty. When we registered Nexus Freight Dynamics 3 years ago, we filed comprehensive patents and secured federal copyrights for every single line of source code you generated. We documented the timestamps, proving you built the architecture on your personal servers, using your own hardware, strictly outside of your contracted working hours at Apex Tech. You never signed a non-compete agreement that claimed secondary developments, and you never signed an IP transfer clause. You own the software outright. Apex Tech was operating strictly on a free revocable end-user license agreement. When you revoked that license, you were simply closing the door to your own private property. I let out a slow breath. Donovan threatened to have me arrested for corporate sabotage, I said, recalling the red-faced vice president screaming in the bullpen. He told my brother-in-law I was going to federal prison. Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Donovan is a corporate bully who is used to terrifying entry-level employees with empty threats. Corporate sabotage implies you destroyed their proprietary property. You did not destroy anything. You simply stopped giving them your property for free. There is no judge in this country who would indict you for locking the front door of your own house. The waiter arrived, dropping off 2 cups of black coffee before discreetly walking away, and Harrison leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The real issue here is not what you did to them, Clara. The real issue is what they are currently trying to do to you. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, setting it squarely between us. I have been monitoring the server logs on the Nexus Freight Dynamics back end since you initiated the lockout protocol. Rep. Harrison explained. Apex Tech is bleeding millions of dollars today. Their board of directors is panicking. Vanguard Logistics is threatening to pull their account in their sheer desperation. To turn the lights back on Donovan and your brother-in-law have authorized their IT department to force their way into your software. I stared at him, my heart skipping a beat. Are they trying to hack the system? They are actively trying to bypass your encryption, Harrison confirmed, tapping a printed spreadsheet showing thousands of failed login attempts originating from Apex Tech IP addresses. They are running brute force attacks to crack your administrative passwords. They think if they can just break in and copy the source code, they can regain control of the freight network and claim you gave them access. I felt a cold smile stretch across my face. My toxic family and my arrogant boss were so blinded by their own entitlement that they were walking straight into a massive legal trap. They do not realize what they are actually doing, I said quietly. Exactly, Harrison grinned, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a legal kill. By actively attempting to breach your private servers, Apex Tech is no longer just violating a software license. They are currently committing a felony under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They are actively engaging in federal copyright infringement. You did not break the law. They did. Harrison paused, letting the magnitude of that reality sink in. He leaned back against the plush leather booth, the victorious energy evaporating into a heavy, suffocating seriousness. He reached into his briefcase again, withdrawing a thick black folder sealed with a tamper-evident security tag. He placed it onto the tablecloth with care, treating it like a loaded weapon. We have a much larger problem, Harrison said. While monitoring the brute force attacks yesterday, I ran a forensic diagnostic on the server logs you secured before leaving Apex Tech. I wanted to ensure we had a perfect untampered snapshot of the entire operational history, just in case Donovan tried to fabricate data against you. I stared at the black folder. My mouth went dry. A chill crawled up my spine. Unrelated to the restaurant air conditioning, what did you find? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harrison broke the security seal and opened the folder. He slid a stack of dense highlighted financial routing logs across the table. I looked down at the numbers. At first glance, it looked like standard freight billing data, but as my eyes adjusted to the columns, I realized I was looking at something entirely different. These were shadow transactions. They were buried deep within the automated billing cycle for Vanguard Logistics, our largest and most lucrative client. Your brother-in-law was not just taking credit for your late nights and brilliant spreadsheets, Harrison explained, pointing his expensive pen at a specific cluster of highlighted numbers. Jamal has been extremely busy over the past 6 months. He has been quietly embedding ghost invoices into the Vanguard Logistics supply chain. Every time your software successfully routed a massive shipment and generated an invoice, Jamal manually intercepted the billing process on the back end. He shaved microscopic fractions of pennies off individual transit costs and redirected those hidden margins. I felt the blood drain from my face. I grabbed the papers and pulled them closer. The numbers danced before my eyes. Jamal was embezzling. The golden boy of the family, the man who demanded respect and obedience, was a common thief, but he was not stealing small amounts. The massive volume of freight Vanguard Logistics moved daily meant those microscopic fractions added up to an astronomical figure. He has been siphoning the money into a holding account, hidden within the apex corporate structure. Harrison continued, his tone clinical and precise. Over the last 6 months, he has accumulated exactly $1.2 million. It is currently sitting in a digital vault, waiting to be transferred out of the company. My hands started to shake. $1. $2 million. If Vanguard Logistics discovered this massive theft, they would not just pull their contract, they would destroy Apex Tech. They would launch a federal investigation. Everyone involved in the account management would be subjected to criminal scrutiny. That included me. Where is the money going? I demanded, my mind racing through the catastrophic implications. That is the terrifying part, Harrison said. I track the destination code attached to the holding vault. It is a one-way routing sequence programmed to dump the entire $1.2 million into an untraceable offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. But he could not execute the final transfer. Why not? I asked, staring at the damning evidence. Because he lacked the executive security clearance, Harrison replied. And that brings us to the real reason you were denied your promotion on Monday morning. The realization hit me with the force of a speeding freight train. The glass boardroom. Donovan tossing my perfect performance review aside. Jamal smirking as he clicked his Mont Blanc pen. My mother calling me the night before, aggressively demanding that I step aside for the good of the family. The puzzle pieces shifted, forming a new, incredibly sinister picture. Jamal did not need the senior director position for the prestige. He did not need it for the corner office, or the salary bump to buy Olivia her suburban dream house. He needed the promotion because the senior director title came with a level 5 executive security clearance. He needed that specific administrative access to bypass the final financial firewall and wire the embezzled $1. $2 million to his offshore account, but that was not even the darkest part of his plan. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. He knew the missing funds would eventually be flagged during the annual corporate audit. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a catastrophic failure to hide his tracks, and he needed a target to take the blame. I stared at the paperwork in absolute horror. He was going to frame me. Harrison nodded slowly. Once he secured the promotion and transferred the money, he planned to initiate a system crash within your proprietary routing software. He was going to use his new administrative clearance to inject malicious code into the Vanguard Logistics billing grid. He was going to manufacture a massive financial glitch and point the finger directly at the original developer. You. My breath caught in my throat. My family had conspired to hand my career to a man actively planning to send me to prison. My mother had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, pushed me toward the edge of a cliff to protect a criminal. Jamal had sat in my living room yesterday, holding my pregnant sister, acting like a victim, while actively working to destroy my entire existence. You were supposed to be the sacrificial lamb, Harrison stated very softly. When the auditors found the missing money, Jamal would have testified. Your software failed. You would have faced federal charges completely alone. The sheer magnitude of his evil plan finally crystallized in my mind. My unexpected departure had accidentally trapped him. By logging out, I froze his money and blocked his escape route. Jamal was not panicking over logistics. He was terrified of facing decades in a federal prison cell without me. The revelation hung in the air of the upscale steakhouse, thick and suffocating. Jamal was not panicking over logistics. He was terrified of facing decades in a federal prison cell without me. I sat completely motionless, staring at the financial logs on the table. My own brother-in-law had planned to destroy my life to finance his greed. My mother had actively pushed me toward the slaughterhouse. A sharp vibration broke the heavy silence. My smartphone buzzed against the white tablecloth. I looked down, the screen illuminated with a new notification. It was a high-priority email alert, forwarded from my personal inbox. 3. The sender was Vice President Donovan. The subject line was written entirely in capital letters, demanding my immediate attention. It read, "Urgent, mandatory board appearance." I unlocked the screen and opened the message. Harrison leaned forward. His professional curiosity piqued as he watched my eyes scan the text. The email was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. It abandoned any pretense of professional courtesy. Donovan bypassed standard human resources protocols and went straight for the jugular. He addressed me with cold formality. "Clara," he wrote, "due to the catastrophic nature of your unauthorized departure and the subsequent failure of the operational grid, I am officially mandating your appearance at an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning at exactly 8. You will report directly to the primary glass boardroom. Do not be late." I read the next paragraph aloud, letting Harrison hear the desperation bleeding through Donovan's aggressive corporate speak. "We are facing unprecedented client fallout," I read, keeping my voice steady. "The CEO of Vanguard Logistics, Mr. The courthouse doors had barely swung shut behind us when my former mother-in-law stepped directly into my path. She planted the tip of her cane on the concrete outside the Hamilton County Courthouse in Noblesville, Indiana, and looked at me with the same expression she'd worn for years whenever she wanted me to feel small. "Don't ever set foot in my house again." Lorraine snapped loudly enough for people walking by to hear. "Get out!" My ex-husband, Mark, stood a few feet behind her in his tailored navy suit. He folded his arms across his chest and smirked, as if the divorce judge had just handed him the greatest victory of his life. I adjusted the strap of my worn leather purse and took a slow breath. The migraine that had been building behind my right eye since dawn pulsed again. Then I smiled. "Actually, Lorraine," I said quietly, "the sale closed this morning." She frowned. "What sale?" "I sold the house." Her face barely changed before I added one more sentence, "and your son isn't the CEO anymore." For 2 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mark laughed, not a nervous laugh, a loud, confident one that turned a few heads on the courthouse steps. "Diane," he said, shaking his head, "you've always had quite an imagination." Lorraine laughed too. "You really think anyone believes that?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain. Not yet. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to Lorraine. "These are the instructions from the attorney. You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings." She didn't even take the envelope. Mark stepped forward. "You've officially lost your mind." Maybe he believed that. Or maybe he needed to. Because if he admitted even for a second that I wasn't bluffing, everything he'd believed about the last 25 years would come crashing down. 6 months earlier, I never imagined I'd be standing outside a courthouse saying those words. Back then, I was still trying to save a marriage that had quietly disappeared years before I realized it. That people always ask when a marriage ends. In my experience, it isn't one big moment. It's hundreds of little ones. It was Mark stopping by my office only when he needed a signature. It was eating dinner alone 3 nights a week because another client meeting ran late. It was him introducing himself at company events without ever mentioning me. The worst one happened at the Indiana Manufacturing Leadership Awards in downtown Indianapolis. Our company, Carter Precision Systems, had just received an award for 25 years in business. I sat at table 12, wearing a dark green dress I'd owned for nearly 10 years. Nothing fancy. I was never much for expensive clothes. Mark walked onto the stage. He looked confident, comfortable, like he'd rehearsed every word. I started Carter Precision Systems with nothing more than a dream. He told the audience. People applauded. I worked every day to build this company into what it is today. More applause. I waited. Surely he'd mention the people who actually kept the company alive. Our employees, his late father, maybe me instead. Thank you all for believing in my vision. That was it. I smiled politely because everyone else was smiling. Inside, something hurt. Not because I needed applause, but because I'd spent 25 years making sure payroll went out every Friday. I'd refinanced our home during the recession. When cash flow nearly collapsed in 2009, I called suppliers myself and begged for another 30 days. I remembered sitting in our tiny office with stacks of unpaid invoices while my father quietly slid an envelope across the desk. He'd sold part of his farmland near Lafayette, $320. Susan. Everything he'd saved after my mother died. He looked at me and simply said, "If you believe this company can survive, then so do I." That money didn't buy us luxury, it bought us time. Time became survival. Survival became growth. Growth became the company Mark now called his alone. A week after the awards banquet, I noticed something else. Mark stopped wearing his wedding ring. Not always, only when he traveled. I said nothing. By then, silence had become easier than arguments. Then one Tuesday evening, he came home carrying a folder. I was heating leftover chicken soup because my migraine had been bothering me all afternoon. He laid the folder beside my bowl. "I've already signed." I looked down. Divorce papers, no conversation, just signatures waiting for mine. "I think this is best," he said. I kept staring at the papers. "What happened to us?" He sighed impatiently. "Diane, we've been roommates for years." I nodded slowly. Maybe that part was true. But roommates don't erase each other. He leaned against the kitchen counter. "I've talked with my attorney." Of course he had. "I'll make sure you're comfortable financially." Comfortable. After 25 years, I finally looked at him. "What do you think I contributed to this company?" He actually looked surprised by the question. "You handled spreadsheets." Just 4 words. You handled spreadsheets. Nothing about negotiating loans. Nothing about keeping employees insured. Nothing about sitting beside hospital beds after workplace injuries. Nothing about missing vacations because someone had to stay behind. Just you handled spreadsheets. He picked up his keys. "I have dinner with Natalie," I assumed. Though he didn't say her name. After the front door closed, I sat there alone until the soup turned cold. I wasn't crying. Not yet. I was trying to understand how someone could live beside me for 25 years and genuinely believe I'd simply organized paperwork. 2 days later, I met Rachel Kim. She'd served on our board for years and had become one of the few people I trusted completely. We met at a quiet coffee shop near Meridian Street in Indianapolis. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she stirred her coffee once. "What do you want?" I expected legal advice. Instead, she asked that. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." I looked out the window. "I want him to stop pretending I never existed." Rachel nodded. Then she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Did you sign this year's voting proclamation?" I blinked. "No, you haven't." I forgot. Rachel smiled for the first time all morning. "No." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick corporate binder. "You remembered exactly when you needed to." She opened it carefully before sliding it across the table. "Turn to page 32. I frowned. "What am I looking for?" Rachel folded her hands. "The reason Mark may have made the biggest mistake of his career." I stared at page 32 for several seconds before I looked back up at Rachel. The page wasn't dramatic. No bold headlines, no secret clause highlighted in yellow. Just a chart, boxes, names, numbers, corporate language I'd spent half my life reading. "I don't understand," I admitted. Rachel turned the binder toward herself and tapped the page with one finger. "You own 38% of the company's equity." "I know, but that's not what matters here," she pointed lower. "Your Class A preferred shares carry 5 votes each." I nodded slowly. "I remember Dad insisting on that, so do I." Rachel leaned back. "Mark remembers too." That surprised me. "I thought you were about to tell me he'd forgotten." She shook her head. "No, that would make this story too easy." She smiled faintly. "Mark didn't forget. He got comfortable." That sentence stayed with me. For years, every annual shareholders meeting followed the same routine. A few weeks beforehand, Mark's assistant would email me a proxy authorization. I'd sign it. Mark voted my shares. The meeting ended. Life went on. I trusted him, I said quietly. Rachel nodded, and he came to believe trust was permanent. She slid another document across the table. This year's proxy, it was blank, unsigned. I never sent it back. No. Rachel looked directly at me. For the first time in 17 years, Mark doesn't control your votes. I sat there without speaking. Outside, a delivery truck backed into the alley behind the coffee shop. Someone laughed near the counter. Life kept moving. Mine had suddenly changed. Rachel continued gently. When your father invested in Carter Precision Systems 15 years ago, he didn't write Mark a check. He invested in me. Exactly. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Dad had never disliked Mark. He simply believed business and marriage were two different things. If this company ever survives because of my money, he'd said back then, I want everyone to remember where that money came from. Rachel had been the young attorney who drafted the agreement. Each Class A share carried 5 votes. They couldn't be converted without my written consent. They couldn't be diluted without my approval. Back then, none of us imagined the company would someday be worth more than $100 million. We were just trying to make payroll. So, what happens now? I asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she folded her hands. That depends on why you're asking. What do you mean? If you're trying to punish your husband for having an affair, she let the sentence hang. Then don't do this. I blinked. I wouldn't, I know. She looked relieved. But if you're trying to protect a company whose leadership has stopped acting in its employees' best interests, she closed the binder. That's a different conversation. Over the next few weeks, divorce mediation moved forward. Everything became paperwork. Financial statements, property valuations, retirement accounts, insurance policies. 25 years of marriage reduced to folders with colored tabs. Mark was polite whenever lawyers were present, almost cheerful. It was strange. He treated the divorce like a business transaction he'd already won. During one mediation session, our attorneys reviewed the marital property. The old Carmel house came up. It had belonged to my parents before they passed away. Although it had become part of the marital estate for settlement purposes, it also needed expensive repairs. The roof was nearing the end of its life. The original windows leaked every winter. The plumbing wasn't exactly young either. Mark barely looked at the appraisal. I don't want it. His attorney glanced at him. You sure? I have no interest in maintaining that place. He turned toward me. You always liked old houses. I said nothing. He wanted something else instead. The downtown Indianapolis condo, most of our brokerage account, his boat, several investment accounts. His lawyer quietly rearranged the numbers. By the end of the afternoon, Mark had formally agreed to waive any future claim to the Carmel house as part of the settlement package. He looked pleased with himself. Walking out to the parking lot, I heard him tell his attorney, I got the better deal. Maybe he believed that. At home, Lorraine had already started acting like I no longer lived there. One Thursday afternoon, I came back from a doctor's appointment. The arthritis in 2 fingers of my right hand had been bothering me again. When I stepped inside, cardboard boxes filled the front hallway. One box had a thick black marker label, **donate**. I knelt carefully and opened it. On top sat my parents' wedding photograph, beneath it, Dad's old pocket knife, my mother's handwritten recipe cards, an album filled with photographs from the first years of Carter Precision Systems, our first rented garage, Mark covered in machine grease, me holding Emily with one arm while answering payroll calls with the other. One photograph had been bent across the corner. I gently flattened it. Lorraine walked in carrying grocery bags. Oh, she didn't sound embarrassed. I figured Mark wouldn't want all that old clutter. I looked up. My parents are clutter. She sighed dramatically. Don't start. I'm asking. You'll be moving soon anyway. She set the groceries on the counter. There's no reason to drag useless memories around forever. I carefully closed the album. Those weren't memories to me. They were proof. Proof that I had been there from the beginning. That evening, while carrying laundry upstairs, I heard Lorraine talking on the phone. She didn't know I was home. I told Natalie she'd love this kitchen once they remodel it. A pause. Oh, absolutely. She laughed. The cabinets are ancient. Another pause. We'll finally make this house look modern. I quietly walked back downstairs before she noticed me. Not because I was afraid, because I suddenly realized she wasn't imagining a future where I still existed. The following Monday, my phone rang. Tom Alvarez, our outside CPA. He almost never called me directly. Diane. His voice sounded unusually serious. Do you have a few minutes? I do. I've been reviewing executive compensation. Something about his tone made me sit down. I found several things Rachel needs to see. What kind of things? He lowered his voice. Large executive retention bonuses. That's not unusual. These were approved without full board review. I frowned. Anything else? A resort trip listed as a vendor conference. Silence. One hotel room. I didn't need him to say another name. He continued. There's more. He explained that retirement contributions for hourly employees had quietly been reduced while executive bonuses increased. Several accounting classifications didn't make sense. Nothing screamed criminal. But together, the picture wasn't good. 3. When I hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen for almost 20 minutes. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about Frank Doyle. He'd worked for us since the garage days. 68 years old now, still showing up every morning before sunrise. If Mark really had chosen bonuses over people like Frank, this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. That evening, Emily came over. She stood in my kitchen, twisting her coffee mug between both hands. Mom, I looked at her. I knew. I froze. Knew what about Natalie? The words barely came out for almost a year. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Why didn't you tell me? Emily started crying. Dad said you already knew. I didn't. He said your marriage had been over for years. I looked down at the table. I believed him. She wiped her face. I thought staying neutral meant I wasn't choosing sides. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sometimes silence chooses for you. I didn't say it out loud. She already knew. The next morning, my phone rang before 8. Rachel. Tom finished reviewing everything. I held my breath. We have enough. For what? She answered calmly. An emergency board meeting. When? Tomorrow. She paused just long enough for my stomach to tighten. 10. I barely slept the night before the board meeting. Not because I was afraid of Mark. I was afraid of myself. At 49, you stopped believing every difficult decision has a clean ending. I'd spent 25 years helping build Carter Precision Systems. I knew every hallway, every machine, every employee birthday, and every family emergency we'd quietly helped through. What if removing Mark hurt the people I was trying to protect? That question stayed with me until sunrise. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of coffee I never drank. The migraine from the day before had faded, but my stomach felt tight. Around 7:30, my phone buzzed. Rachel, I know what you're thinking, she said before I spoke. Do you? You're wondering whether this is becoming personal. I looked out the window at the maple tree my father had planted, the year Emily was born. It is personal, it is. Rachel didn't argue, but that doesn't make it wrong. I stayed quiet, she continued. If Tom's report were clean, I'd tell you to walk away. And if it isn't, then your responsibility isn't to Mark. She paused. It's to the company. An hour later, I drove to the office. The familiar Carter Precision Systems sign came into view, and for a moment, I remembered the first building we'd rented. 8,000 square feet, one loading dock, one coffee maker that barely worked. Back then, Mark and I celebrated every new customer with takeout pizza. We weren't competing with each other. We were surviving together. That memory almost made me turn the car around. Almost. When I entered the lobby, I noticed people behaving normally. Someone laughed near the vending machines. Forklift alarms echoed faintly from the production floor. Reception answered phones. Nobody knew what was about to happen upstairs. I hoped they never would. Not the details. Companies survive bad leadership. They don't survive constant public drama. I took the elevator to the executive floor. Rachel and Tom were already there. Tom looked exhausted. I reviewed everything twice, he said quietly. You won't find mistakes. I never thought you would. He nodded. I wish I had. Rachel handed me a folder. This isn't your fight unless you decide it is. I appreciated that. Nobody was pushing me. Nobody was promising revenge. Only accountability. At 9:10, another board member arrived. Stephen Cole. He'd served on the board nearly as long as Rachel. He greeted me politely. I wasn't expecting to see you today. I imagine Mark wasn't either. He smiled faintly. I'll be honest, I hope you are. I'm uncomfortable mixing divorce and corporate governance. So am I. That seemed to surprise him. I don't want revenge, Stephen. Then why are we here? I looked him straight in the eyes. Because if Tom's report had been about anyone else, we'd still be having this meeting. He considered that for a few seconds, then simply nodded. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't dismissal either. At 9:40, my attorney called. The judge signed the settlement. I closed my eyes. So, it's official. Yes, and the property? The title company has authorization to close. I whispered. Thank you. The call ended. I stared at my phone for a long moment. The Carmel house was finally mine alone. Not because I'd tricked anyone, because Mark had chosen something else. During mediation, he'd insisted on keeping the downtown condominium, most of our brokerage account, and his boat. He'd called my parents' old house a money pit. He wanted liquidity. He wanted convenience. He'd laughed when his own attorney suggested thinking twice. She can have the old place. Those had been his exact words. Now, the closing attorney was waiting only for final confirmation from Ben Foster. For the first time in months, I allowed myself one slow breath. At 9:55, my phone buzzed again. An email. Subject *** shareholder proxy authorization ***. I frowned. The sender was Mark's executive assistant. Routine, professional, exactly the same format I'd received every year. Please sign at your earliest convenience. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because habit is powerful. For 17 years I would have opened the attachment, signed it without reading, and sent it back. My hand actually reached for the mouse. Then I stopped the date. Today's date, 10, board meeting. I immediately forwarded the email to Rachel. A few seconds later she replied. ***. Thank you. Do not respond. That one email told the board something important. Mark wasn't trying to steal my vote. He simply assumed he'd always have it. Sometimes arrogance doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it quietly expects yesterday to repeat forever. At exactly 10, Mark walked into the boardroom. Same confident smile, same expensive suit, coffee in one hand. He looked around the room. Morning, everyone. Nobody answered immediately. He noticed me. His smile faded. What are you doing here? I was invited. He laughed once. This is a board meeting. Rachel closed the leather folder in front of her. It is. So why is Diane sitting here? Rachel answered calmly. Because she's a director and a voting shareholder. Mark blinked. Fine, he shrugged. Let's get this over with. He sat at the opposite end of the table. Natalie wasn't inside. She waited outside, probably expecting Mark to introduce her later as our next chief operating officer. Rachel looked around the room. Before we begin, I'd like everyone to confirm they've received Tom Alvarez's audit summary. Papers rustled. Everyone nodded. Mark looked irritated. What audit? Tom slid a folder toward him. You'll want to read page 4. Mark flipped through the first few pages. His expression changed. What is this? Rachel answered, our agenda. He looked back down. Executive compensation, conflict of interest, travel reimbursement, unauthorized bonus approvals. The room grew quiet. Even the air conditioner suddenly sounded louder. Mark looked directly at me. This is because of the divorce. No, it's exactly because of the divorce. Rachel interrupted gently. No, she folded her hands. This meeting is about corporate governance. Mark leaned back. You've got to be kidding. Rachel remained calm. The evidence speaks for itself. Tom cleared his throat. Mr. Carter. Mark glared at him. To Portis's, the accounting records show executive retention bonuses approved without full board authorization. They were legal, perhaps. Tom nodded. But they weren't properly disclosed. Mark looked toward me again. You planned this. I met his eyes. I planned to tell the truth. His voice hardened. You're willing to destroy the company because I left you for a moment. The room disappeared. I saw us 25 years earlier, covered in machine grease, eating cold pizza on folding chairs, laughing because we'd finally landed our first big contract. Then I came back to the present. No. I spoke quietly. I'm trying to stop you from destroying the company we built, not the company you built. The company we built? Nobody spoke. Rachel looked around the table. The board will now review the motion concerning executive leadership. She placed one final document in front of every director. Then she looked at me. I suddenly realized this wasn't the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of whatever came next. Nobody reached for a pen. Not right away. The silence inside the boardroom felt heavier than any argument I'd ever heard. Mark looked from one face to another, searching for someone who would smile, crack a joke, or tell him this was all some misunderstanding. Nobody did. Rachel adjusted her reading glasses. Mr. Carter, before the board considers any motion, you're entitled to respond to the findings. Mark straightened in his chair gladly. He slid Tom's report aside as though it were nothing more than a restaurant menu. The relationship between Natalie and me is personal. He glanced at me before continuing. My marriage had already broken down. Rachel nodded once. The board isn't evaluating your marriage. Then why bring it up? Because the relationship wasn't disclosed while executive compensation decisions affecting Miss Green were being made. Mark folded his arms. She earned every dollar. Tom opened another folder. No one is questioning her work performance. He pushed several documents toward the directors. We're questioning the approval process. Mark looked at the papers but didn't touch them. Tom continued calmly. 3 retention bonuses were approved without full board review. He turned another page. The Aspen resort trip was categorized as vendor development. Another page. The receipts show no scheduled vendor meetings. Another. The hotel reservation lists 1 suite. Mark's jaw tightened. You've been digging through my private life, Rachel answered before Tom could. No, we've been reviewing company records. That distinction mattered. This wasn't about catching a cheating husband. It was about whether the company's leadership had stopped respecting the rules everyone else followed. Mark leaned forward. This company doubled in value under my leadership. Rachel nodded. It also belongs to its shareholders, and to 180 employees, I added quietly. He turned toward me. So now you're pretending this is about them? No, I've spent 25 years worrying about them. The words came easier than I expected. I remember calling machinists during the recession to promise payroll would still clear on Friday. I remember sitting with Frank Doyle's wife in the hospital. I remember telling employees we'd find a way through CO before we even knew how. I looked around the room. I don't remember asking for credit. Mark laughed once. Bull. I shook my head. I asked for honesty. The room fell silent again. Rachel placed a printed resolution in front of every director. The first motion concerns Miss Natalie Green. The vote was quick. Her pending promotion to Chief Operating Officer was withdrawn. Administrative leave. Independent review. The motion carried unanimously. Mark looked stunned. He'd expected disagreement. He'd found unity. Rachel continued. The second motion concerns Mr. Carter's position as Chief Executive Officer. She paused long enough for every director to look down at the resolution. The recommendation before the board is removal as CEO, effective immediately, and appointment of David Reynolds as Interim Chief Executive Officer, pending a permanent search. Mark stood up so quickly, his chair rolled backward. This is insane. Nobody answered. He looked directly at Stephen Cole. You've known me 20 years. Stephen sighed. I have, so vote no. Stephen looked genuinely uncomfortable. I wish this weren't happening, so do I, but I can't ignore the governance issues. Mark stared at him, then at another director, then another. Finally, he looked at me. Rachel spoke firmly. No, Mark, this is the board's decision. She looked around the table. Please cast your votes. One by one, hands went up. Yes, yes, yes. Stephen hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might save Mark. Instead, he slowly raised his hand. Rachel counted quietly. The motion passes. She looked at Mark. Effective immediately. You're removed as Chief Executive Officer of Carter Precision Systems. No applause, no dramatic music, just silence. Mark remained standing. His face had gone pale. You can't do this. Rachel folded the signed resolution. We already did. She slid the document toward me. As chair, I need one additional signature acknowledging the shareholder certification. My fingers ached as I picked up the pen. The arthritis in my right hand chose that exact moment to remind me it existed. I almost smiled. Life had a strange sense of timing. I signed, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the record to be accurate. Mark stared at the signature, 25 years reduced to 1 line of ink. A facilities manager knocked softly on the open door. He'd worked with us for nearly 15 years. His voice was almost apologetic. Mr. Carter, whenever you're ready, I'll help you collect your personal belongings. Not security officers, Not humiliation, just a man doing his job that somehow made it even sadder. Not an hour later, I walked out of the building alone. The summer air felt warmer than I had expected. Instead of relief, I felt tired. Deeply tired. My phone rang. It was my attorney. Diane, everything all right? The closing is complete. I closed my eyes. So, it's official. Yes, Ben Foster now owns the Carmel property. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat inside my car for several minutes without starting the engine. I'd imagined this moment dozens of times. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I missed my father. I wished he could have seen that the little house he'd loved so much would remain standing instead of being torn down. Ben had promised to restore it, not replace it. Dad would have liked that. I drove to Carmel because there was one last box of personal things I'd left behind. When I pulled onto the street, another SUV was already parked outside. Ben Foster stood talking with his realtor. They smiled politely when they saw me. Then another car stopped. Mark. He climbed out without saying a word. A minute later, Lorraine opened the front door. She spotted me immediately. Her face hardened. She walked toward the front steps as quickly as her knees allowed. Then she planted her cane across the walkway. Don't ever set foot in my house again. Several neighbors glanced over. Lorraine didn't care. Get out. I took one slow breath. Actually, Lorraine. She folded her arms. Yet the sale closed this morning. What? I sold the house. She laughed. No, you didn't. And Mark isn't the CEO anymore. She looked toward her son. Mark didn't answer. For the first time since I'd known him, he couldn't find any words. Ben quietly stepped forward. Mrs. Me Carter. Lorraine frowned. He held out a folder. I'm the new owner. She ignored the folder. This is my son's house. Ben didn't argue. He simply opened the paperwork to the final page. Mark's signature, the settlement agreement, the closing confirmation. Lorraine grabbed the papers. Her eyes moved from one page to another. Then she looked at Mark. You signed this? Mark rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't think. No, she interrupted him. You didn't. Her voice cracked. For a second she looked much older than 74. At that moment, a sheriff's deputy pulled up. One of the neighbors had called, after hearing the shouting. The deputy listened patiently, reviewed the paperwork, then handed everything back. Ma'am, he said gently, the property legally changed ownership this morning. He wasn't rude. He wasn't dramatic. He simply explained that the court-approved agreement gave Lorraine 72 hours to remove her belongings. Nothing more, nothing less. Ben turned toward her. I've already arranged movers if you need help. Lorraine didn't answer. She was still staring at Mark. I suddenly noticed 3 paint samples tucked under her arm. White, gray, cream. She had been planning a new kitchen. Ben smiled politely. For what it's worth. He pointed toward the old cabinets. I actually plan to restore those for the first time all afternoon. I almost laughed. Not at Lorraine, at life. She'd spent months planning to remodel a house that was never going to be hers. I picked up my last cardboard box from the hallway. As I walked toward my car, Mark followed me. Diane. I stopped. Please. His voice sounded different, now not angry. Desperate, I need you to fix this. This the board. You still have influence. I looked at him for a long moment. I don't want your marriage back. I know, I want my job. I believed him. That hurt more than I expected. He still didn't understand what he'd actually lost. I can't help you. You could? I shook my head. No. He lowered his voice. I'm asking. So am I. For what? Respect. He looked away. I climbed into my car. 3 weeks later, an invitation arrived in my mailbox. ***, Carter Precision Systems Annual Employee Appreciation Banquet. I almost threw it away until I noticed one handwritten note at the bottom. Please come. Rachel. When I walked into the ballroom at the Indiana State Museum that evening, the first person I saw was Mark. He wasn't supposed to be there. I stopped just inside the ballroom doors. The Indiana State Museum had hosted Carter Precision Systems' annual Employee Appreciation Dinner for years. But this time, the room felt different. Rounds, covered with white linen, stretched across the ballroom. People who had worked beside me for decades stood talking over coffee and slices of pecan pie. Some had retired years ago, but still came every summer, because in many ways the company had been their second family. Then I saw Mark. He was standing alone near the back wall in a charcoal suit. Not at the head table, not surrounded by executives, just standing there. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving. I wasn't interested in another confrontation. Rachel spotted me before I could escape. She walked over, smiling warmly. "I'm glad you came." I almost didn't, I figured. She glanced toward Mark. "He insisted on attending. You let him? He's still a shareholder." She lowered her voice. "But tonight isn't about him." I nodded. "I hope not." Rachel touched my arm gently. "I have one favor to ask." "What is it?" "Just stay until the end. I don't know if I can." "You can." Her confidence reminded me of something my father used to say whenever I doubted myself. Asterisk. You don't have to enjoy doing the hard thing. Asterisk. You just have to do it. Dinner passed quietly. People stopped by my table to say hello. Most asked how I was doing. A few apologized for not reaching out during the divorce. I told them the truth. I wasn't ready to talk. Frank Doyle eventually sat down beside me. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. His hair had turned almost completely white, and he moved more slowly than he used to. But his smile hadn't changed. "Good to see you, kid." He'd been calling me kid since I was 24. "I've missed you, Frank. You look tired." I laughed softly. "I am. You'll sleep better." "I hope so." He nodded toward the stage. "You're going to like tonight." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He only smiled. "You'll see, Anna." After dessert, Rachel stepped onto the stage. The conversations gradually faded. She thanked everyone for another successful year before talking briefly about the company's history. This year marks 25 years since Carter Precision Systems opened its first workshop. A large screen behind her lit up. An old photograph appeared, the garage. I hadn't seen that picture in years. There was Mark, 28 years old, grinning beside our first used milling machine. Then another picture, me sitting on a folding chair with a calculator, invoices spread across a card table. The next one made me laugh through unexpected tears. Emily as a toddler asleep in a cardboard box while I finished payroll. People around the room chuckled. Another picture. Dad standing proudly beside the first CNC machine we'd managed to buy with his investment. I felt my throat tighten. Rachel continued speaking. "For many years our company history recognized only one founder." She paused. That history was incomplete. The next slide appeared. A simple title, asterisk asterisk founders asterisk 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 Mark Carter asterisk 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 Diane Whitmore Carter asterisk asterisk. The room became very quiet. Rachel looked directly at me. "Some people build companies by making sales." She looked around the ballroom. "Others build companies by making sure every employee gets paid. Every supplier gets called. Every problem gets solved before anyone else notices." She smiled. "Tonight we're correcting the record." I heard my chair scrape softly against the floor as someone stood. Then another, then another. I turned. Frank Doyle was already on his feet. He wasn't clapping yet. He simply stood. Within seconds, nearly everyone else followed. The applause started slowly, then grew louder and louder. I looked around the room. People I'd hired, people I'd comforted after surgeries, people whose children I'd watched grow up. Some were smiling, some were crying. I was doing both. Rachel motioned toward the stage. I shook my head. "No," she smiled. "Yes." The applause didn't stop. Eventually I walked forward. The steps felt strangely long. By the time I reached the microphone, my right hand was trembling enough that I had to hold it with my left. I laughed softly. I had a speech prepared. That wasn't true. The audience laughed with me. I guess I don't anymore. The room grew quiet. I never wanted recognition. I looked across the ballroom. I only wanted the truth. I paused. My father used to tell me that integrity is what you do when nobody is watching. I smiled toward the photograph still displayed behind me. "He would have loved seeing all of you together tonight." I took another slow breath. This company was never built by one person. It was built by welders, machinists, receptionists, accountants, engineers, forklift drivers, maintenance crews, and families who believed this place was worth sacrificing for. I looked around one last time. Thank you for letting me be part of that. The applause returned even louder this time. After the program ended, people gathered around to hug me. Frank eventually reached me. "You forgot something." "What?" He smiled. "My wife's surgery." I blinked. "I didn't forget. You never told anyone." I smiled. "It wasn't anyone else's business." Frank turned towards several younger employees standing nearby. When Linda needed heart surgery back in 2007, the insurance hadn't kicked in yet. He looked back at me. Diane arranged an advance out of company funds. I interrupted him. We approved it through payroll. He grinned. She also drove casseroles to our house for 2 weeks. I felt my face turn warm. You don't have to tell everyone that. Yes. He nodded firmly. I do. He looked around the room. Mark knew how to grow the business. He pointed gently toward me. She knew how to take care of the people inside it. Nobody applauded that time. They simply nodded. Some truths don't need noise. I noticed Mark standing near the ballroom exit. People weren't avoiding him. They simply weren't gathering around him anymore. He waited until the room had mostly emptied before walking over. We stood facing each other. No lawyers, no judges, no board members, just two people who had once believed they'd grow old together. I owe you an apology. I waited. I should have given you more credit. For a moment I almost accepted that. Then I realized something. Credit wasn't what had been missing. I looked him in the eye. You should have given me respect. He lowered his head. I know. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked quietly, do you think you'll ever forgive me? I thought about that carefully. I already have. He looked surprised. But forgiveness isn't permission to come back, he nodded slowly. I understand. Whether he truly did, I honestly couldn't say. Emily found me outside overlooking the canal. She wrapped her arms around me without saying anything. After a while, she whispered, I'm proud of you. I kissed the top of her head. I'm proud of you too. She smiled. For what? For finally realizing you don't have to carry everyone else's arguments. She laughed. I'm still learning. So am I. Life became surprisingly ordinary after that. I bought a small ranch-style home in Zanesville. No stairs. A little garden. Enough room for Emily whenever she visited. And I started consulting for smaller manufacturing companies a few days each month. Just enough to stay busy, not enough to lose my weekends again. Ben Foster occasionally sent photos as he restored my parents' old house. He kept the original hardwood floors, the front porch, even the kitchen cabinets Lorraine had wanted to replace. Dad would have smiled. 3 months later, a handwritten envelope arrived. The return address surprised me. Lorraine inside was a single sheet of paper. Asterisk Diane asterisk. Asterisk, I was wrong about the house. I was wrong about your place in the company. Asterisk. I don't expect you to answer. Asterisk, I only wanted you to know. Asterisk Lorraine asterisk. I didn't write back immediately. A few weeks later, I mailed her a simple card wishing her well after another round of physical therapy. Compassion didn't erase the past. It simply meant I no longer wanted to carry bitterness into whatever years I had left. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether winning felt as satisfying as I'd imagined. The truth? Not exactly. Watching Mark lose his title didn't heal me. Selling the house didn't heal me. Being recognized at the banquet didn't heal me. What healed me was finally believing I didn't have to earn respect from people who had already decided not to give it. Growing older teaches you something success never can. Peace is worth protecting. Your dignity is worth protecting, and it's never too late to stop apologizing for knowing your own value. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone underestimated you, I hope you know you're not alone. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I truly hope the people in your life recognize your worth before it's too late.